Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can become a member of the show now. Go to the Ampire Media homepage, see the word join, click on that, find the tier, the membership level tier that you want to join. Go for it. Thank you very much for everybody who's doing that. Going to get you a lot of good stuff here really soon. Also, you can read my work on ESPN.com. In a minute or a couple minutes, I'll be joined by Kevin Sheehan. You know him as a radio host in DC with 980, also as the Kevin Sheehan Show podcast. Go ahead and listen to that. Always very informative and entertaining. Give him a listen. So I'll get to him in a minute. We're going to talk about all the news that happened today. So all the Ben Johnson stuff. We did not get into Bobby Slowick because that hadn't happened yet. But we did talk a lot about Ben Johnson and what does this mean for the Commanders? Where do they go? Who do you like? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what factors should be taken into consideration? So Kevin and I get into all that. Good discussion. Stick around for that in a couple minutes. But first, let's go over the news of the day, which starting with Ben Johnson deciding to stay in Detroit. Now, and I mentioned this with Kevin, but the funny thing is I had been told by somebody last night, or just in casual conversation, like, hey, the person's like, I was talking to so-and-so and they said, wouldn't surprise me if Ben Johnson just stayed in Detroit, but it wasn't as a prediction. It was as a more, he did it last year too. You could see him doing it again. Still hard to believe because these jobs are hard to get. So why did he do it? And that part is a lot harder to answer. What I do know is the Commanders were told en route to Detroit, where they're going there to interview Aaron Glenn and of course Johnson. They got a text message while they were mid-flight to say that he was going to stay in Detroit. So why did he do that? Is it more about the money? Were teams scared off? Well, he was still on this team's list and they knew the money. So I don't know that it was like a matter of them scaring teams off because he was still on their list. But the other part was, the unfinished business part? Well, that was kind of the case last year. And while I think it's hard for a lot of people to believe that, some coaches included in the league, that's also one of the things that you heard. And I heard this is what I, again, heard this last night. And then you heard a little bit more today, family really likes in Detroit. Okay. All of that, that's all plausible. And those are all the things that you hear. Bottom line is he's not coming. And, for whatever reason, and I don't think it was a matter of them telling him he wasn't going to be their guy because he was still on their list. I don't think that was the reason. It could just be as simple as the guy just wants to stay there and maybe he doesn't feel he's ready to be a head coach. I don't know. Only he can answer that, but it is a curious move because you just don't see it very often. These jobs don't come open all the time. And Kevin and I get into this. You may not be the hot coordinator in a year or two when you're now ready. And, if it's as simple as family likes it there, well, your family's still going to like it there in a couple of years. Are you going to, when would you want to make the move? If you do, and maybe not everybody does. I don't know. And Adam Schefter reported that it wasn't like he was getting this big raise from Detroit. So, only he can answer all the motivations for wanting to stay. And bottom line is he's out of the Commander search. Bobby Slowick got a raise to stay in Houston. Now, I don't think he was going to be the guy. So I think that's a good move for him and Houston. And it's a good move for him because I think he gets more experience. One of the things that you would hear about him is that, does he have enough experience? He's only been a coordinator 1 year. He was a passing game coordinator for 1 year in San Francisco. So if I'm another team, I'd like to see him get more experience. If you're Houston, good to give him that money because now you buy some security with getting your OC in there for a couple of years in a row to help develop CJ Stroud. So it's a good move for both sides, gives him more time to season. I also think it gives Houston a little bit more time to maybe get that succession plan in place already, because maybe you didn't think, I don't know how they felt about him this year. Did they think that he'd lose him after 1 year, or maybe even a couple of years? I don't know, but it allows them to build a succession plan in place if he continues on this trajectory. So now it's down to a few guys. It's down to Mike McDonald, Dan Quinn, Aaron Glenn, and Anthony Weaver. I don't have the particular order. I think the stronger feelings come with McDonald and Quinn, but that's speculation. Again, everything else has been speculation, but it's why, listen, I did the podcast today about what if it's not Ben Johnson. I did that for a reason because I didn't think it was a lock. still would have thought, I still said on there too, that I think that's where it would have gone, because I know that for some, he was a preferred candidate, but I never heard that he was like, that it was unanimous lock, just like Adam Peters. Didn't hear that. And that's one of the things you're kind of waiting to hear. But I also know, as I told you, they were pretty tight-lipped. Sometimes you still hear things, but with Peters, after the fact, especially, you knew that that was their guy all along. I did not get that sense going into the search that there was that one guy that they had to come away with. I think there have been a few guys they like a lot in this process, and there are aspects of each guy that they're going to like. That's why they're interviewing him. But I did not get the sense that it was a unanimous slam dunk. It's got to be Ben Johnson for them, or bust. I think he was one of their top guys for sure, and a preferred candidate certainly for some, because I do think they wanted to come away with an offensive minded coach. But now the two that would have been on the list, one who would have been a top candidate and one who I think was not a top candidate, now they're both gone. So again, with McDonald, they talked to him on Monday. They talked to Dan Quinn on Tuesday. I've told you before, like, the thing that you hear about McDonald, we know his defenses have been very good and very adaptable. I think that's a big key. I think his defenses are fun to watch. The way they attack opposing offenses, I think it speaks very well of him. He does have a connection to Washington. He and Eugene Shen, who is now Washington's vice president of football strategy, came up together in Baltimore, and they shared the office space and became kind of close. Now, is that enough to get him the job? No, but it's certainly helpful to have somebody in the building who knows him and what he's about, and who, just how he is in the building. I think that's important, but it's certainly not going to be Eugene Shen's call as to what they do. He's not even part of the interview process. It's going to be Myers and Spielman, Josh Harris, Adam Peters. Those are the primary players here. But McDonald's certainly going to be very high on that list. Seattle is going to be very high on him as well. So it'll be interesting to see which way he goes. And then it's Dan. And I don't know that I don't know have this particular order, but Dan Quinn would certainly be there as well. Kevin and I are going to get into him. And I've told you before, of all the candidates out there, he's the one that I've heard the most things about, and positive or good things about, from people outside the organization. Now, again, I will also say he's got more experience. He's worked with more people. So that's why that could be a big part of the reason. I know that for a lot of fans, he wouldn't win the day. But this is about finding the right guy for the organization. If he's the right guy, then that's who they'll roll with. Aaron Glenn, very strong leader. That's why he's on this list. And Anthony Weaver, I don't know. I haven't heard the same kind of buzz about him as I have with some of the others. So I don't know what's going to happen with him. I think he's an intriguing guy for other teams. And, so we'll see where it goes. But those are the four guys left. And, I still think I don't think this changes their timetable necessarily, because if they were so set on Ben Johnson and had to swerve in a different direction, I could see it changing something. I don't see them adding on more interviews. I haven't heard that. If that happens, it would be a surprise to me, but I haven't heard that. So I know the Vrabel question gets asked. If they were concerned about some things before, didn't want it before, I don't know why you do it now. If you wanted them now, you should have taken them then. So you clearly could have gone in that direction right away. So I don't know that anybody else. So I don't know that this necessarily changed the timetable from them getting something done by Thursday or Friday. That would be ideal, I think, for them, but we'll see. And it was never it could have happened as soon as tonight or Wednesday morning, for sure, or Wednesday afternoon, because you would have had everything wrapped up. I don't know, but I never got the sense that it was going to happen Wednesday. I think it would have been more Thursday or Friday. And I still think by the end of the week, it could happen. And we'll go from there. So anyways, that's enough for me. You want to hear the conversation with Kevin Sheehan. So here's my conversation with my pal, Kevin Sheehan. Kevin, when I talked to you this morning to say, hey, could you come on the podcast? It was designed to say, like, which of these coordinators do you like, or these candidates do you like, and how much do you like Ben Johnson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then Ben Johnson pulls out. So of this candidacy. So boy, kind of the discussion is going to go in a different direction. How surprised were you that he said no thanks?
I was surprised that he's going back to Detroit. I mean, I would ask, these are the questions I typically ask you. I was very surprised that he's staying in Detroit. Now, we had heard here in the last day or two, the Schefter appearance on McAfee yesterday, that, Ben Johnson wasn't a guarantee to Washington. And I guess part of me has thought for a while, and I think I've said it in every conversation, look, according to those that are on the beat nationally, locally, he's the leading candidate, but it
Right.
doesn't mean that they'll be able
Right.
to bring it home for sure. And I had heard a few weeks ago that they were very, very impressed in their first get together with Dan Quinn. I
Yes.
think Quinn's the guy that's been, a head coach before, and that it might even be plan B if it falls through with Ben Johnson. We'll see about the interviews that they've had subsequently with other guys like Slowick and then Weaver and McDonald and Glenn later today. But yeah, I was really shocked. The one thing, and I'm curious as to what you think, there are people. Maybe he just isn't ready to be a head coach. One of the things I heard, and I talked to a couple of people right when the news broke, Dan Campbell's not only the biggest voice in the room,
Right.
he is the room.
Right.
And Aaron Glenn is a close second.
Right.
And Ben Johnson's the cerebral, the guy that hasn't had the room, over and over again. And there are people that aren't, maybe he's just not comfortable with taking on that kind of a role yet. The problem, of course, is we all know as fans, these opportunities where you're the hottest candidate, there's no guarantee next year that the team he's involved in doesn't have injuries galore, go 6-11, and there are three teams you didn't expect to be good who are great, and their coordinators are now the hottest guys on the market. So,
right.
Yeah. So we'll see.
And that's all. So I was actually talking to somebody last night, and I'm just kind of going over some of the people here, and they're like, well, I was talking to somebody in the league who said, don't be surprised if he goes back, if he stays there, because, and it wasn't so much like, and it wasn't so much like, hey, he's going to do this. It was a, don't be surprised because, hey, the guy did it last year too. And, and so I go back to that because well, they were clearly onto something, but it wasn't presented as such hard news. They like, oh my gosh, but it was more like, hey, the guy did it last year. He could do it again. And right. I go back to what you just said, that Dan Campbell runs that show. And one of the concerns I heard from people, the number one concern that I'd hear about Ben Johnson was in that realm, right? Because as a head coach, you need to be the guy. The reason why Aaron Glenn is on the list is not because his defenses are awesome. They're not. It's because of his personality. And right. So you have to keep that in mind. And so from that standpoint, it's not shocking. But even when I was talking to this person last night, I'm like, but who does that 2 years in a row? Well, they're like, well, Dan Quinn did it in Seattle. And he stayed there a couple of years because they gave him a big pay bump, apparently. But nobody does that. Nobody else does that. It's just so rare. Yeah. What do you think the signals for this team? Does it signal anything that they, if he's the perceived top candidate and they couldn't get him, does it signal anything to you at all?
I mean, I just finished recording the pod with Tommy, the podcast, and I said, look, there are three main reasons this didn't come about that are possible reasons. One is he wasn't impressed with Washington or Seattle. Two is they didn't like him or they weren't impressed with him. Or three, and I'd lean this direction, he just has a self-awareness about him that he's not really comfortable or ready. Now, what you're reading is he wants to stay to win a Super Bowl. He wants to stay super loyal. He's got 2 years left on his current deal, and he's not even going to, Schefter just tweeted, he's not even going to ask for a pay raise. Well, he should. He's got more leverage than, any coordinator's had.
Well, he just lost his leverage.
But going into it, before he told Washington and Seattle no. But yeah, I think, it's one of those things here's the thing that's interesting is, does it hurt him in the future? It didn't hurt Dan Quinn, but does it hurt him from this perspective? Man, you had two opportunities 1 year as hot as an offensive coordinator's been in a long time on the open market, and you weren't ready. maybe you'll never be ready.
Right.
I don't know, but the risk is that somebody, there's a better looking blonde or two of them, next year when everybody's looking for a new head coach, and he's not the belle of the ball next year because Detroit isn't anywhere near as good next year as they were this year. We all know that's a possibility in the
Right.
NFL. There's no guarantee that Detroit's going to win 14 games or 13 games and be back in the same position again.
No, and I mean, listen, if Bobby Slowick isn't hired here, he could be that hot guy next year if the Texans offense gets better. So you don't know.
Right.
You're right. And that's why it's so rare to do this. And if he's not getting extra money, then that says a lot, because again, that's what I was told with Quinn is, and I'd have, it could just be hearsay. I don't like to repeat that, but like he did stay, and it's rare. So, and you do wonder how many chances you get. So now when you look at it from a fan base perspective too, while I've talked about Dan Quinn a lot, and I know that they like him, and I know that others who have played for him, worked with him, worked for him, all really sing his praises. But the fan base does not seem to want him. So what's your take on him?
Well, if I were Josh Harris and Mitchell Rails and Adam Peters, I wouldn't give two craps what this fan base thinks. I'd hire the best guy. You heard Adam Peters say they're looking for a leader of men, and Dan Quinn is that. Our most recent impression of Quinn is not a good one. The loss to the Packers, where he got absolutely destroyed by Matt LaFleur. I don't care what our fans think. Our fans think Sam Howell or Taylor Heineke should be. I shouldn't say our fans. That's not fair. There's a sliver of the fan base that's going to be upset about Dan Quinn, but they don't know anything about Ben Johnson or Bobby Slowick or Mike McDonald. You know more about Dan Quinn, so they don't like Dan Quinn because why? Because he, in the first 2 years in Atlanta, 2 or the first 3 years, he went to the playoffs, took a team to the Super Bowl, had a 28-3 lead. The next year, remember, in Atlanta with Kyle Shanahan as the offensive coordinator, I would imagine, there's been a lot of discussion about how Adam Peters probably knows Bobby Slowick well. I guarantee you, through Kyle, he knows Dan Quinn really well. Dan Quinn hired Kyle to be his offensive coordinator. But anyway, that second year in Atlanta, John, they were within a whisker, a Julio Jones catch in the end zone against Philadelphia to advancing to the NFC title game, and Philadelphia never gets that Super Bowl with Foles. But Quinn's been a really good defensive coordinator throughout his career. In Seattle with Pete Carroll, in Dallas, he was a good head coach, a winning head coach in Atlanta. Everybody in the league loves him. I heard somebody, friend of mine texted me and said, he's Rivera number 2. I mean, Rivera is well respected, had a head coaching career, was respected as a coordinator, but I know more about Dan Quinn than I do Ben Johnson or Bobby Slowick. He would not have been my first choice, but I don't care what my first choice is. I'm relying on Josh Harris and the search committee and Adam Peters to get it right. And we don't know anywhere as much as they know about these guys. And they're the ones sitting down with them. So at some point, now that Dan's gone and Rivera's gone and others probably will be gone, we just got to give this a chance to work and trust their decisions. I'm going to.
Well, and that's been my take is, do you trust them or not? Because if you do, if you think that Josh Harris made a good hire to get Adam Peters, do you then trust this whole group to then make the right decision on the head coach? And, you have to build up that trust, but do you have that now? Because you're right. Like, we're not in these interview sessions. I'm talking to people in the league, and I know you have too, but you're not doing heavy, intense work to find out more about the guy. And the other, with even with Ben Johnson, I mean, clearly they wanted him. There was it wasn't like they said, oh, no, thanks. So they clearly saw something they liked in him, but we don't know what kind of a head coach he would have been. And to me, it's almost like, do you draft a quarterback at 2, or do you somehow go trade for one or sign a free agent who's kind of a mid-tier guy who what you're getting versus the unknown at 2? And, so like the unknown at 2 can be very enticing and intriguing. I get it. And whereas like Dan Quinn, people know, they saw what he's done. They see some of the body of work. I think it would always come down to, do you hire a good staff? What's your plan for the quarterback? Because right now,
Do you think it's going to be Dan Quinn?
I don't, I don't, I don't know. I know that he was somebody they liked, but
Yeah, me too.
Kevin, it's my gut might go there, but I don't know how firm that is because Mike McDonald to me is a very good candidate. And I don't know, like Anthony Weaver, I don't know that I put him there. Aaron Glenn, I think is an intriguing guy because of all the leadership stuff I hear about him. But I think when they started talking about some of the stuff they wanted, well, Dan Quinn fits that. But does Mike McDonald, who Eugene Shen knows, and could McDonald become that guy and maybe a better version of that? That's what we don't know. And I think, so I would say, like, there are so many strong leaders in that room talking to these guys, the Bob Myers, the Spielman, Adam Peters, Josh Harris. All those guys are strong leaders and have built organizations. I think they know the qualities they want in people to lead. So that's what you kind of fall back.
Yeah. And remember, it's not just what, people around the league think of Dan Quinn or Mike McDonald. It's what, Harris believes will be the best fit with Adam Peters. Can you imagine, though, like 2 weeks after, people being super excited about them getting Adam Peters, and then all of a sudden they're just completely turned off that Adam Peters hired Dan Quinn.
Right.
Like, he's a hero. He's the savior 2 weeks ago, and then he makes his first decision and people are off of it. It's ridiculous. We don't know anything about what they know as it relates to these head coaches. And the only thing we know about their candidates Dan Quinn is the only guy Raheem Morris would have been in that category.
Right.
We know what kind of head coach they have the potential to be.
Right. And that's the thing that's the part that we don't, that is the hard part to know. And I get that. And I get, like I said, I get from a fan perspective why you want the flash new toy, the unknown. And, I don't put Dan Quinn just because they're both on defense and lost the Super Bowl. I don't put them in the same category, right? Because to me, it will still come down to who do you hire as your staff? And I felt like they were short here. And does he do a better job with
Imagine if Mike McDonald says, you know what? I'm staying in Baltimore to see this thing through. We got to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah. If that happens, then it's like, well, what's going on here that you couldn't entice him?
Yeah. Right. Or, he could pick Seattle too.
Yeah, no. And and that's the other part of it. So I think but you're right though. I don't want to dismiss how fans feel about a situation because they're trying to rebuild this place. You're trying to sell hope and all that. I get it. But
I think they should. I don't think that should be anywhere near.
No. Right. And
it shouldn't be on the list what fans think. Their job is to hire the right guy.
Right. And I agree with that. And that's what I was going to say. So, but I don't dismiss how people might perceive it. However, we've both been here long enough to know there have been how many years where they've made a move, and this is a different group. I get it. But when a move was made in the offseason here, and then everybody's excited, and then it's a complete, collapse during the season.
Right.
So get the right guy, regardless of the reaction, that you feel can build this place up right.
Right.
And then go from there. Yeah.
I mean, anybody that's negative on Dan Quinn going in, have at it. I mean, you're totally entitled to your opinion.
Yeah.
But really the critique has to come 3 years from now. How did they get it right with him or not? Atlanta, probably felt like they got it right with Dan Quinn. They went to the Super Bowl and had a 25-point lead in the Super Bowl. They won a division the next year and won a playoff game as well. And then it kind of, cratered a little bit, and the pandemic came and they had injuries and they got rid of him. I don't know. We're acting kind of like it's Quinn. Again, if it's McDonald, if it's Aaron Glenn, if it's Weaver, if it's Slowick, I'm in that mode right now of I'm excited they got Adam Peters, and I'm going to sit back for a couple of years and see whether or not they pick the right people to turn this around.
Do you care if it's an offensive guy or defensive guy?
My preference was an offensive guy, especially given that we're going to have the number 2 pick, and more likely than not, it's going to be a quarterback. and that'll be a significant hire. And I was thinking, like, first of all, I don't know why Vrabel isn't getting, more attention for these jobs. I would have been thrilled had they been interested in Vrabel, but for whatever reason, they're not. Seattle, I guess, was briefly. Maybe he wants too much control. Who knows? But I was thinking, if Vrabel had gotten the job wherever, it would have been Arthur Smith, but now Arthur Smith is somewhere else. Obviously, Dan Quinn was with Kellen Moore in Dallas, but Moore is in Philadelphia now. Just thinking about some of the ties. If Slowick came, would it be Brian Greasy that would come with him? Yeah. I mean, who knows?
I've heard good things about Greasy.
Yeah. So if it's a defensive guy, the OC becomes the critical hire because of what they're going to do in the draft at number 2, more likely than not.
Right. And I agree with all that. Like, all things being equal, you want the offensive guy. You want that guy because for that reason, you want to keep him in the same system, the quarterback in the same system, especially when you're drafting one. But I would not, clearly they did not just dismiss defense because most of their candidates are on defense. So, yeah, but it is funny.
Most of the candidates in general, John, this hiring cycle were on defense.
Yeah. And I'm okay with that because, again, get the right guy and go from there. But when you go in those interviews, you better have a very good plan for who you want to hire as your coordinator and a good succession plan. If you hire coordinator X, if let's say they hired, even if it's Slowick and you bring in Greasy, you still want to have, like, Slowick would be running a lot of the offense, but you still want to have a succession plan for whomever. And if somebody else, if Quinn brought in Brian Greasy, you still need to have he has to have the succession plan. And I'd say that here's the other part, Kevin. And I was telling someone else, like, since I've covered this team, I think this would be the 9th hire. I think it would be 7 offensive coaches. In my time covering this team, the offense has mostly sucked. So it's more than just, it's Norv Turner, then it was Spurrier, then it's, and even under Gibbs, the offense wasn't very good. And Zorn, it wasn't, it wasn't good. Shanahan had a couple good years. Gruden had a couple good years, but largely it has stunk. But so is the defense. So it's not like that side of the ball has been better. It comes down to, if you hire that guy, they better have a good staff. Shanahan did. And you better get the quarterback and not have him, cozy up to the owner. So.
Yeah. I mean, we're excited about Adam Peters. There will be, a reaction to whomever the head coach is. Who they pick at number 2 has to be right. They got to get that right. That probably will have as much impact on the future as anything else will. If it's a quarterback. The other thing about Quinn too, John, is just that it's very possible that he's just more equipped right now to put a staff together than maybe the guys who are coordinators, coming up. I would imagine that Quinn's got, all of his years in the league. There are a lot of guys out there that would want to work for him if he is the person that we've heard that he is.
Correct. And that's a good point. And I think it's a very valid point. But is there anybody else out there when you look at these candidates just from the outside that intrigues you more?
Yeah, Vrabel.
All right. And I think
Vrabel would be the one.
I do think that's a power thing for teams because, I never heard his name attached to here. So I do think it's a power thing. No. But of the guys on this, what of the guys on their list now?
On the list.
Yes.
Oh, on the list right now. I thought you said off the list.
No,
none of them. I guess McDonald is the one just because they were so good scheme wise defensively, and they really they shut down Kyle Shanahan's offense like we've never seen Kyle Shanahan's offense be shut down. That final score on Christmas night, 33-19, I think, was so misleading. It was an absolute beatdown. They picked off Purdy 4 times. They couldn't do anything against Baltimore's defense, but that Baltimore defense has a lot of talent too.
Good coaching talent,
but he's coached up guys too. Yeah. I mean, he coached up the D tackle Matabike. He's done a phenomenal job, but I don't have a strong preference about anybody on the list because I just don't know enough about them as head coaches.
Right.
Vrabel, I know, is an excellent head coach. I think he's been a top 10 head coach for a while now. He's 48 years old, but he's not on their list. So
No.
I don't know why he isn't, but he's not on apparently anybody's list, which is very surprising to me.
It is to me too. And again, I just wonder, because the whole thing, even with Belichick, with in some other places, like the whole thing is how much power do they want? And they made it clear here that you may have a coach who's at like a 10 level, but if they don't feel that he's going to be, the key word is aligned, no more position versatility, it's aligned. So if you're not aligned with the GM and Adam Peters, you may be the best coach, but are you the best fit? And they were looking for fit and all that more than as much as anything, which I don't blame them, because we've seen it here where they're not aligned and it messes up. Eventually it gets screwed up. And I don't know, like that's in general, I don't know that applies to Vrabel, but I do think that that's a reason why they're going in the direction they are. And, you know, we'll see, but I don't, Kevin, you know, I'm with you on McDonald. Like, I really like that defense, and I like, they are very talented. So is Detroit's offense was very talented. And I thought Ben Johnson maximized that talent, just like I think Mike McDonald maximizes that talent. And I've always heard he's very, very strong. He's a very strong communicator, which is very good as a head coach. That's important. He's young, but you're going to have to, you know, I think if you're young, you need to have a patient owner. I think they have that. So I'm intrigued by him. And, you know, I clearly, we know that Quinn is going to be a serious candidate. I don't know that he'll end up with it, but, you know, we'll see. Like, you know, so anyway, you got any extra thoughts on this, Kevin?
No, I just, I was like you, I was on the air. I was at the end of the radio show and the news broke and I'm like, he's doing what? It's, you know, I really think from his standpoint, it's a very interesting move. And I bet you this really has more to do with him and his comfort level of being a head coach right now in his life at 37 years old, his confidence to be a head coach. People, I mean, we often just think these guys are all, you know, they'll take that job. They can't wait to get that job. Some people maybe aren't cut out to be head coaches, or at least not now at the age that he is. So that part's interesting, but obviously the more interesting thing is what's next here, and we'll find out soon.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Some people aren't, and I know other people who become head coaches who had to work on various aspects of those traits to get to that point. And it's funny because I asked somebody too about, you know, well, if he is like, and I'm not even saying with him, but if a coaching candidate, if they're a little bit more of an introvert, does that matter? It's like, not if you hire somebody strong on the other side of the ball. You have to hire somebody. Like when Spurrier was here, he was not a disciplinarian or anything like that. He had Marvin Lewis. Marvin ran the show. And the reason why they were competitive was because of Marvin Lewis, right? So if you get that other strong guy over there, it can offset something you don't have, you know, as long as you're organized. So there you go.
I mean, and that was not his role in Detroit. Campbell and Glenn were alpha 1 and alpha 2 in Detroit.
And that's why Glenn will be interesting. Like, again, I put him on that list because he is a very strong leader. And so anybody who has that quality, we've all heard that's what they want first and foremost. Now you better have other stuff with it, because even with Glenn, I was talking to somebody about him, like, yes, he'd be strong in that role, but you're not necessarily going to get the schematic advantage that you would with maybe a McDonald or a Ben Johnson. But if you feel like he's that good of a leader, maybe then you know, and then like, okay, who, like Dan Campbell, you're not getting a schematic advantage from him, but you're getting a philosophical edge with what he does. And he hired two good coordinators. So listen, that he's a guy, like, he hired a good coordinator because the guy keeps staying, who's really good. So kind of rare. So anyway, Kevin, I appreciate your time, man.
Anytime, John. Thanks for having me.
Oh, by the way, folks, listen to Kevin's show. Kevin, tell them where they can find all your stuff.
Team 980 on radio 10 to 1 and the KevinSheehanShow.com podcast. You can get it on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you get a pod.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Thanks, John.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Kevin for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back on Thursday with another episode as we continue talking